Let's bring in now Jonathan Fahey, former acting ICE director, former deputy assistant for DHS, and a former federal prosecutor. Jonathan, picking up where Bill left off, and just so that our viewers understand, HHS's Office of Refugee Resettlement, the ORR, is the entity for which every unaccompanied child that comes across our border illegally is put with. So this deal, in conjunction with the Guatemalan government, for which we have very strong repatriation ties, was worked out. This was being carried out, and this judge steps in. Help me understand, why would she do that?
I hesitate to say, but it seems fairly political at this point, because this seems like it was a carefully reached agreement between our country and the Guatemalan government. And a couple of things that are really important here is that these children are going to be reunited with their parents as long as they're here in the United States, being held, in either, in detainment facilities or things of that nature. They're not with their parents. And it's a real irony, because we always hear things, people accusing Donald Trump of separating families. Well, here he is trying to put these families back together, and the Democrats and these judges and these groups are trying to prevent that, because they want to keep it's quite revealing. They just want to keep the illegal aliens here. But let me say, here's why I think Donald Trump or the Trump administration will win on this. First of all, this is a repatriation, not a deportation. So this is something that they are going back voluntarily in an instance where it's in their best interest, in cooperation with the Guatemalan government. These are not people that are fighting this, and their parents should be the ones that stand in and say what's in their best interest, not some immigration group. And the second part of it, while he'll win, is because the courts, maybe not this court, but the appeals courts and the Supreme Court, are giving a lot of deference to the executive branch on these decisions, particularly foreign policy decision where they reached an agreement with the Guatemalan government. A court shouldn't come in and disrupt that agreement. So I think on sort of basic policy, on fairness, humanitarian reasons, everything about this, I think the Trump administration will win, and these children will be reunited with their families, but it may take a few rounds in the court system to get there.
It struck me as a little bit odd, Jonathan, because the plaintiffs are arguing in this that the children's due process is being violated via deportation, but yet at the same time, the bigger picture here, we know some 300,000 plus unaccompanied minors illegally crossed the border under the Biden administration, either via a human smuggling operation or were placed with unvetted sponsors. That is a major focus, a key top priority of this administration. Here's a case where these children's parents were notified. The parents want them back, and yet this judge is stopping it, saying that these children, these unaccompanied minors, due process was violated. How do you see it?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and it's sort of remarkable in a lot of ways when you look at the track record of ORR losing 300,000 kids. So which is better for the kids, the unknown or getting back with their parents? And in every sense, we always, as a society, defer to being with the parents. So I think this will pay out legally in favor of Donald Trump, and they will get repatriated with the parents. And it sort of dates me, but remember the Alien Gonzalez case? Yeah. The Democrats were on the total opposite end of that, trying to send Alien Gonzalez back to the communist country of Cuba rather than staying here with actual relatives that he had here. It's kind of an interesting irony, but I do think fairness, keeping families together, everything warrants sending them back. Even if it ends up going through the immigration courts, they're going to go back, but I don't think it even needs to go there. This district court will ultimately lose or ultimately be reversed on appeal, even though she'll probably rule against Donald Trump initially.
We'll see how this plays out. Jonathan, stick around and stand by. We've got another top story we'd like to get your take on. Molly?
From that temporary restraining order, President Trump is firing back at an appeals court that ruled that he did not have the right to issue many of his tariffs. He says the tariffs were bringing in trillions of dollars in investments into the U.S., and without them, the U.S. faces becoming a third world country. Alexandria Hoff has more on this from Washington. Good afternoon, Alex.
Good afternoon, Molly. The way the president sees it, America's greatness depends on revenue brought in by his tariffs. His economic agenda certainly does. He wrote on Truth Social in part, quote, if a radical left court is allowed to terminate these tariffs, almost all of this investment and much more will be immediately canceled. So on Friday, a 7-4 decision from the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit found that most of President Trump's tariffs imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act exceeded his authority. The panel stated this: the statute bestows significant authority on the president to undertake a number of actions in response to a declared national emergency, but none of these actions explicitly include the power to impose tariffs, duties, or the like, or the power to tax. Now, the tariffs, if they do remain in place, as the ruling does not go, well, they are in place right now, excuse me. This ruling does not go into effect till October 14th. So this is to give the Trump administration time to file an appeal to the Supreme Court. The administration is banking on that route.
So it was a bad decision, but the good news is the dissent was very, very strong. I think it provides a very clear roadmap to how the Supreme Court can certainly rule in our favor. We feel very optimistic. If we lose the case, President Trump is right. It will be the end of the United States.
In the event the Supreme Court upholds the appeals court's decision, the president would have limited avenues to impose tariffs. Legislation would likely have to carry any future action, and importers could even potentially seek out complicated reimbursements. Now, some of the deals and frameworks that President Trump has negotiated directly with countries, they likely won't be impacted because those countries agreed to the tariffs, Molly.
Great point. We have about 6 weeks until the Supreme Court potentially could clear things up. Alexandria Hoff, thank you very much.
All right, let's bring back Jonathan Fahey and get your read on this, Jonathan. It looks like the administration sort of thought this was going to the Supreme Court all along, and those that are really against it are saying that this International Economic Powers Act of 1977 doesn't specifically mention tariffs, therefore he lacks the authority. How do you see it? Put your lawyer hat on.
Well, it's interesting. Remember, this was a 7-4 decision, so it wasn't just sort of one-sided. There was at least 4 on the dissent. But ultimately, they made 2 decisions. One saying the things he said were emergencies, like the manufacturing and the fentanyl emergency and the trade deficits weren't appropriate uses of the act, which I think that will ultimately get reversed because the deference will be given to the executive branch. And then the other thing they said was, well, you can't use tariffs under this act. You can use a lot of other things. The Trump administration said, and will say in the Supreme Court, it doesn't say you can't use tariffs, and they're going to expect the Supreme Court to basically defer on the executive branch's decision to invoke this act and how to apply it. So ultimately, I think it will go his way just because we've seen a lot of these other cases at the Supreme Court give a lot of deference to the executive branch. And what Donald Trump is talking about is really important because if somehow this gets over or this court gets upheld, a lot of these deals might either be undone or be undone in the future. It takes away a lot of leverage. And the other thing is, I think we've brought in about, I think the number is something like $15 trillion of investment. Mm-hmm. And part of that is using the leverage of this act to get people to invest. And importantly, I think, which is a really important use of this act, things like pharmaceuticals, when we sort of learned during COVID that everything is being made over in China or somewhere else, that it's important to have those things here. And it is an emergency for health and national security. So ultimately, I think he'll win, but it's a very interesting issue.
And just lastly, in the few seconds we've got, the Wall Street Journal writes that this case may force the Supreme Court to address the major questions doctrine. Do you understand that? Does that seem like that's coming down the pike?
Yeah, and that basically says major questions of sort of economic policy should be made or the genesis should be in Congress and not the executive branch. So they'll say this was a major economic policy made by the executive branch, and that should be in the purview of Congress. So, yeah, they may address that as well and sort of frame out what that actually means.
All right, we'll see where it goes. Jonathan Fahey, thank you very much, and thanks for joining us on a Labor Day holiday.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Will Kane. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Kane podcast for full episodes right now.